morning, everybody, and thank you for joining us today. My name is Brittany DeFilly. I'm the Educational and Outreach Coordinator here at Verteks. Today, we have a great presentation from Ooma talking about replacing your POTS lines and what's happening with the kind of end of life with copper lines. So with that, I'm going to kick this over to our Ooma team, and they'll present themselves. So, Dave, it's all yours.
Thank you very much. My name is Dave Beagle. I'm a senior manager here in strategic sales, really hyper-focused on our POTS replacement solution. So, the title of the webinar is apropos. It's Navigating POTS Line Retirement, how Verteks and Ooma make that transition smooth. But on the title slide here, as you look, it's also about turning some of the savings that could be had in replacing your copper lines and reinvesting into your business. You might have other initiatives where you're looking for budget. And hopefully, if we do a good job, you're going to find that budget is actually right there for your taking. So with that, let me do a quick introduction of Ooma. Many of you may have heard of us in different contexts. We've been around since 2004, so by all means, we're not a fly-by-night organization. We're very well established. But if you do know us from our beginnings, we've been replacing copper lines all these years, right? And as a business, as a B2B type organization, we are focused on our UCaaS or hosted telephony solutions and SIP trunking, and we do voice enablement for the Teams environment. But it is the POTS replacement solution that we're going to dig into that has really been driving a lot of the interest in Ooma as an organization. Now, if we're going to talk about replacing POTS lines, specifically for more of your mission critical environments or your fire life safety, we have to consider the fact that we are a publicly traded company. Therefore, there is a certain comfort that you should have in working with an organization like ours. We do get all the compliance and regulatory oversight that is placed on us for being a publicly traded company. And a couple of the things I'll highlight that I love on this slide. We are supporting 2.5 million endpoints on our network today. It's a highly resilient and available network, which I think is going to be a critical factor for this type of solution. And the other thing I like to point out is, when we think 2.5 million endpoints, it's across all verticals. And POTS line is, when we think about those analog and copper lines, they are found in almost every vertical that is out there. And it's probably likely that it actually applies to your business. So the driving factor of why we're here and why we're talking about this is what they're really kind of deeming this copper sunset, right? All these copper lines that have historically been out there for decades servicing all these endpoints, whether they're fax machines or door controllers or whatever. This copper sunset, in essence, is the FCC moving forward and deregulating this side of the industry. And when we think deregulation, basically, it allows the incumbents, the AT&Ts, the Verizons, and whatnot, it allows them to move away from having to be mandated to supporting those copper lines, but it also takes the gloves off from all the pricing protections in the regulatory environment as well. And as you can see, the big driver for a lot of these incumbents to move away from supporting copper, as I pointed out, they've been in the ground for decades. The lines are beginning to deteriorate. It's costly for them to maintain it, and it takes a lot longer for them to repair it when there is an issue. There are new technologies out there, which is what we're going to talk about, and while it makes sense to actually move forward into a different kind of topology. Now, with this deregulation, we're seeing across the board all these incumbents talking about how they're going to move away from supporting these copper lines. AT&T is probably the biggest noisemaker in the space right now. AT&T last fall in their investor call actually stated they are going to shutter all their copper lines by 2029. But it's not just AT&T, it's Verizon. They're sunsetting POTS in a few of their states. As you can see here, Frontier says they're going to be decommissioning all of their copper lines 3 to 5 years. So if you kind of look at it from the perspective of about a 5-year horizon, let's say 2030, there's approximately, I would say 10 million, and this is conservative, 10 million lines that are still out there servicing businesses. And so when you think about the migration strategy, think about the migration of these lines, what we're seeing is you would have to migrate about 9,500 lines a day between now and then. And that's a heavy burden on the providers like in Ooma or others to actually get those done. But it's also incumbent upon the businesses to make those decisions earlier and not get caught with that, at the end of it, trying to get everything, force-fed, force-pushed into a migration. This chart here is really just about the rate of these decommissioning. So, just 2 years ago, it was 10%. We started to see the increase in this. And then it increased, and you can see exponentially it goes up. You're going to be right there at the end. So again, think about the copper lines in your own environment that maybe you haven't really been focusing on. And we're going to highlight why you want to focus on it. Because it's not just the deprecation or the decommissioning orders that are coming out. It's also with that deregulation, the pricing increase. And this is probably the biggest impact to almost every business. Now, we know that most businesses who have copper lines servicing these fire life safety environments or these mission critical environments, we know there's only probably a handful, and they're not necessarily being actively managed. It may be, and this might be within your own environment, where a lot of these bills are going right to the AP department, and they're just signing off and writing the checks and sending it out. Now, this example that I'm sharing with you is a real example of one of our partners who was paying about $100 a month for their copper lines. No, now in their invoice was a notice of rate increase that nobody saw. In that increase, it said they're going to raise the rates, and in effect, the following month they added a $900 per line surcharge, effectively making it a $1,000 a line. Now, note, their contracted rate for the POTS line stayed the same. It was a $900 surcharge or fee that was added, and those generally are not protected by your contracts with those carriers. So that's their workaround, something to be aware of. But this particular case, they were exposed to this cost increase, which is about $12,000, $13,000. By the time they research and go find another solution and get it implemented, it was at a minimum another month. So they were exposed to $25K overall. If you're a school, $25K, that's a lot of laptops for a lab. If you're another organization who's maybe looking for cybersecurity or AI assessments, this is money that could have been used in those areas. And this is why I say this is low-hanging budget fines in your organization if you haven't already done a migration or looked at that. If you haven't looked at your bills, this is a perfect time to do that. Now, when we think of these copper lines, the driving thing is this decommissioning or the deregulation. But most organizations right now are already looking at it. We did a survey late last year that found that 35% roughly of all businesses were already starting to look at how they were going to replace those copper lines and what that looked like. And many of those were already evaluating some of the vendors. And of course, what's key to all of that, if you're going to be replacing these copper lines for these mission critical environments, then some key things really become paramount. Reliability and uptime. That's a no-brainer for all businesses, right? But the security and compliancy is a big element. And we're going to talk a little bit about that because when, again, fire life safety environments, we want to make sure that these are compliant solutions, making sure they integrate with the other technologies, minimize disruption, et cetera, et cetera. So let's talk a little bit about what I'm saying when we think mission critical or fire life safety. These typically are the environments that we find copper lines still servicing. It's your elevators, it's your fire alarms, it's your security panels. Often cases, they're access points like gated phones or door entry controllers. You may have blue light phones or emergency call boxes in your environment. We see this regularly in schools or municipalities. We see this in parking garages or storage facilities, right? These are unattended boxes where you press a button, you need to get to emergency personnel. High volume fax machines, the physical fax machine. A lot of organizations still have a reliance or a desire to leverage those fax machines, and we support that. When I say high volume, think 40, 50 pages that need to be transmitted and received reliably, and typically that doesn't work well over a standard ATA or an analog terminal adapter. And so we'll talk a little bit about how we support that. Your environmental controls, boiler rooms, HVAC systems. We see it in gas meters and whatnot. A lot of times there's copper lines servicing those for out-of-band management and other use cases. And then, of course, your traditional PBXs. Those traditional PBXs, a lot of times they have analog lines for emergency failover, and we support that application as well. So you can see there's a lot of different ways or areas that POTS lines are still being leveraged. And while you may have gone to the cloud for most of your other voice services, all of us cloud providers historically have said keep these type of applications behind on those copper lines, but now it's just not feasible with that deregulation. So hopefully I painted the picture of what, when we say mission critical or fire life safety, what lines we are tackling. Now, I mentioned we've got to think about compliancy. If we're connecting to fire alarms and we're connecting to elevators and whatnot, there are national guidelines in which we want to adhere to make sure that we're fully compliant. So when inspectors come out, that they can just sign off on it, right? Or if an audit or a spot inspection, which is quite often done on elevators, that you're feeling like you're comfortable in the compliancy area. So let's talk a little bit about NFPA 72. NFPA 72 is a National Fire Protection Association, and Article 72 is all about how these fire alarms need to communicate with its monitoring station. The reason why I'm highlighting NFPA 72 is it's the most stringent of the guidelines that are out there. And if we could adhere to that, then we're falling into the support of the other compliancy areas like ASME, which is all about elevator communications. So NFPA 72, for example, you have to have power continuity because that's no longer being served by the central office over the copper lines. So our device needs to have an embedded battery, but it has to minimally be 8 hours for power continuity. And in some municipalities, they're increasing that to 24 hours. So we've got to check that box, and we do, right? Other things about NFPA 72, you want to make sure that your network is private and secure. And we've done that with the carriers that we're working with, which will be on the next slide that I'll highlight. ASME is very similar, not as stringent, but you still need power continuity. You still need some of these other elements to make sure the elevator cabinets can actually communicate and get out. UL certification is the making and manufacturing of these type of devices. And because this is POTS replacement or copper line replacement, this is a shared communication device. So we fall into the compliancy areas needed for HIPAA or for PCI if you're running credit cards or doing financial transactions. And we did run this through a couple of very stringent fire bodies. Notoriously, California and FDNY are very stringent, and they actually have a process. And so we ran it through there, and we're fully compliant there. And again, that provides a level of comfort that knowing that if you're deploying this, you're going to be in a compliant environment. Compliancy is critical, right? You don't want to have the liability of an emergency call or something occurring and finding out that the device you were connecting to was not a compliant device. You're exposed, and we've seen people actually receive some pretty hefty fines in that area. So how this works is we generally will deploy what we call Ooma AirDial. This is the device that we manufactured from the ground up specifically for these environments, for these fire life safety environments. We'll deploy AirDial in your demarcation point where typically your 66 block, where all the copper lines are coming in today, and it will re-terminate those endpoints into the back of AirDial. And we do that with an RJ11 connection. So it's a telephone jack. It's a very simple connection from that standpoint. And we see a lot of our customers, and we have different deployment options. We see a lot of our customers for very basic, simplistic deployments do it themselves, and we've tried to make that easy to do. But that's being said, when we terminate all of these end POTS lines into the back of the AirDial, we'll transmit them over one of our LTE providers as our primary path, and that's AT&T, it's T-Mobile, US Cellular, and Verizon. And what's interesting here is the device does have dual SIM capability. It has 2 SIM slots. So we'll deploy this fully managed. And when I say fully managed, it's going to come with its own SIM. It's going to come with the data plan on it. And we're going to manage it from our network perspective. And you'll have the full support based out of the North America. We have actually offices in California, Vancouver, BC, and Florida. But you'll be supported out of the U.S. Primarily. Now, when we go over these carriers, I mentioned in NFPA 72, we have to be private and secure and encrypted, and that's critical. And we do that with these LTE providers. Now, the other thing that we bring to bear is this device does have an Ethernet port. And if you were to connect your LAN, your Ethernet to the device, and we have LTE going at the same time, you have 2 different egresses. We turn on what's called multipath transport. Multipath basically duplicates every voice packet and sends it over both routes. It's a highly resilient solution. This way, when it's active, when you're in an elevator and you're pressing that button, if one of the routes is impacted, that call stays up on the other route. So it's fail-safe versus fail-over. As you likely know, if you fail over networks, if you have a primary path, but you all of a sudden have to move to a secondary path, there is a lag. There is a time horizon that's occurring when it goes over to the other network. More often than not, voice packets, which are sensitive to that, actually will drop. So just put yourself in the position of being stuck in an elevator, your anxiety's kicking in, and you're pressing that button. You really want to make sure that if there is a route impact, you're still up with the same emergency personnel you've been talking to or guiding you. You don't want that call to drop. That creates a lot additional stress than you need. I do believe strongly that this is the most resilient solution in the market because of that true multi-path active fail-safe scenario. Now, to give you an idea of the device itself, here's one that's depicted wall-mounted as in the picture. It's a fairly small form factor. It weighs about 3 to 5 pounds. When I say fairly small form factor, just look at the power strip right below it, to give you an idea. As you look at that device on the wall, notice that there's a little LCD screen. This makes the deployment and placement of these devices easier. On that screen, you're going to get what the LTE signal levels are. You'll be able to see the battery status and the battery levels, as well as you get to label the lines what it's connected to. If you've ever gone into your closet or your demarcation point and you've looked at those 66 blocks, and you can see it even in this picture, those labels that were placed originally have long been gone, and people don't really know what's connected to what. And so this is a great time for us to kind of modernize that approach, from an asset perspective. So labeling the lines, being able to see that and whatnot. But I highlight the screen because one of the biggest objections we get is, well, this is going in my basement, my boiler room, my closet, whatever it might be. I'm worried about signal. And so by having that screen, we can make sure we find the optimal placement. But it is worth noting that when we manufactured this device, we understood this is for fire life safety. This is not an internet backup device. And so we've optimized the chipset on the device to gain more signal. Most devices out there, like your cell phone, for example, are always trying to find the balance of throughput and signal. For us, it's all about signal. If we get 2 bars or 2 stars, we're fully operational. But we have antenna options. If we need to, we can put higher gained antennas. We can extend the antennas with 50 and 100 foot options. We actually have an exterior mounting kit that can go outside the building and home run it back to the device. So gaining signal generally has not been our biggest obstacle. In fact, the wiring outside of the buildings is usually the part that is deteriorating. The wiring inside the buildings is usually still fine. If we needed to re-terminate leveraging riser wiring into another location of the building, we can absolutely do that. So again, getting signal, not been our primary objection. It is worth noting, you see the back of the device here, right below the picture. It's a 4-port device, and you might ask a question what we do on higher density ones, and I'll talk about that in a moment. But 4 ports, what we find is typical of most environments where you have 2 to 3. It's an alarm, it's a fire, it's a fire alarm, it's an elevator, it might be security, it might be a fax machine, whatever it might be, but it's the 80-20 rule. 80% of the time, one device is going to handle it just fine. It is a recessed power switch, and it is a locking power cord, so you can't accidentally unplug it or turn it off, which I think is a key element for fire life safety devices. Now, the other thing is we do have a NEMA enclosure. We have NEMA enclosures for cold conditions and for hot conditions. Just kind of give you a quick picture of that. But let me go back and talk a little bit about higher density for a second. We often get the FUD that gets put out there. Like if I have, let's say, 30 copper lines going into a Class A building, you only have a 4-port device. And we've designed it that way purposely, because what happens is we'll stack the devices to support 30 lines. We'll stack them, and then what we'll do is we'll what I call striping the lines. So to paint that picture, you have multiple elevators. You're going to put elevator bank into one unit, another bank into another unit. You're going to stripe those lines across the alarms so that they're going across different devices. We're mitigating for single points of failure. There might be higher density devices out there, but that's the single point of failure. We don't want that for fire life safety or for mission critical stuff, which is why we've designed it purposely the way we have. Now, for non-fire life safety environments where you have high density copper lines, and we see this with schools and in hospitality and whatnot, we do have gateways that actually accessorize with the POTS replacement or the AirDial where we can actually meet those needs. Hospitality is actually one of our strongest verticals because we reuse that wiring in the phones in those rooms in that kind of application. So I just wanted to highlight that because it's something that we hear in the market. You need a higher density box, and we say we don't because we want to mitigate for single points of failure.
That
Now, the
actually
other
was
big
one of
thing,
our questions. So one of our attendees did ask how many ports per device, and you were just answering that. But also another question, is there just one connection per on the AirDial to your network?
well, we go over the ideal deployment would be to go over our LTE and to have the Ethernet connected, because now you have two separate egresses that are two different types of technologies, right? Going over wireless and wireline. By doing that, those packets will come right back to our network, and our network has redundant data centers across the country and in Canada. So we've got the diversity there. But yeah, from a single point, I would leverage the LTE and the Ethernet simultaneously. The dual SIM, you'll hear people argue that dual SIM is the way to go. I argue back that dual SIM is not necessarily the way to go, because you're using the same type of technology, and a lot of these carriers leverage the same towers. And if the tower is the thing that's having an issue, it doesn't matter if you're on Verizon or AT&T, you're probably still going to be impacted, right? And we've unfortunately have seen every LTE provider have some form of major outage in the last 18 months. And so I'm going to press that wireless and wireline is the most resilient solution there.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Absolutely. That's why we're here, right? To educate. And so listen, I love this part of our solution. Ooma AirDial really does bring POTS into the 21st century. If you think historically about what the issue with these copper lines was, you had no visibility to it. There was a misnomer in this idea that copper was kind of a set and forget and was the most reliable form of transport. And in many ways it was, but it was the visibility that was lacking. You didn't really know if the lines were working until, unfortunately, an inspection was done or they needed to be used. And we see this quite often, again, back to elevators. We see it, it's funny. We see all the condos and apartments and whatnot. They have pool phones. How many calls we get right before Memorial Day because they need to open the pool, but the pool phone doesn't work, right? And so I like to think, again, we're bringing it into the 21st century by providing software that allows facility managers, building owners, safety compliance officers, the visibility to know what's going on with those lines. And if you're in a distributed environment, excuse me, having multiple devices, having that dashboard, that single pane of glass to see all of that really is a game changer. And so you can see on the screen here, we talk about that where you've got 3 locations just kind of listed here, and you get to see quickly what the battery statuses are, what the LTE signals are. And, the WAN status right on this screen, as an example says LTE. Well, that could say Ethernet if it was just going over Ethernet, or it would say multipath if it's going over both, right? So you actually know what it is. And again, back to asset management, you can see what lines are connected to what. You can actually label them with alphanumeric designation. So it could say elevator instead of just the DID. You can look at the temperature of the devices. You can see all of these type of things. But beyond just the visibility, you can actually dig in. You can dig into the individual units themselves, and you can get more granular data. Like maybe you want to look at the signal noise ratio if you want to geek out on that kind of stuff. You get visibility to that. But you can designate this. It's a hierarchical platform. You can designate different members of your organization for view only or edit rights or whatnot. The thing I love is that just here on the right-hand corner is just the dashboard view. If you have lots of sites, like we have a REIT out west that's managing 300 apartment complexes. They have 2,500 POTS lines in their environment. They're not going to scroll up and down on that dashboard looking for individual devices. They're going to look at this kind of quick snapshot of the overall health of all their devices, and then they'll be able to actually dig in if they see anything that is red or is offline or like that. So that's kind of very handy from a visibility perspective. But again, back into this, you're into the individual units. You can actually set up certain alerting conditions, which I think is another significant game changer in bringing POTS into the 21st century. If your device goes out of service, i.e. your POTS line is down, then we're going to send you an SMS and an email to designate a context indicating such. If your device kicks into the battery, which might indicate a power outage, same thing, we're notifying you. Now, this is software we developed, and we're taking feedback from not only our clients, but our partners on what they want to see. What was the historical pains for POTS and what they would love to see as we continue to evolve. And one of the things that we rolled out not too long ago was our call notification alert. So this is literally, I press the elevator button, I'm now sending an immediate text or email to those contacts. If it could be all of a sudden the E911 line off of the PBX was rung because the PBX failed and it went that way. We're sending an alert. It's the emergency call boxes, right? It's all of those type of environments. And again, this kind of gives you an idea, all set up within this portal, right? This access point. And you can just kind of get a little example of what these notifications look like. This has been a game changer for us in the POTS replacement industry, is the call notifications. And if you guys have ideas, we're always open to hearing what those might be and see if we can't kind of develop it. But listen, POTS replacement, this whole world, because of what's gone on with the FCC deregulation, there are all kinds of solutions out there. I think these, I always like to focus on where we excel and what our differentiators are. I want to reiterate a couple things. This is a device we built from the ground up specifically for the environment. It is not an OEM device. We're not reselling somebody else's solution. Therefore, all of our developers and engineers have firsthand knowledge of the solution, and we can jump on anything if we ever needed to. It is the software that I just highlighted. It's a fully managed solution. We're deploying it with the SIMs. We're deploying it with all of the network components that you require outside of your LAN, because we don't want to manage your LAN. That's something you guys do on your end very effectively. But we work with you to make sure firewall ports, all that's opened up. We are an MFN. That's the private network, to making sure all of that traffic stays on that private network and doesn't go over the public internet. Encrypted, I think that's critical, right? And secure. Our installation options, we have multiple installation options. Most people, for simplistic deployments, do a self-install. But if you need to do a guided install, we'll allow you or Verteks to kind of be the eyes and hands if need be, and we'll guide. Or we could do a full-on pro install where we're sending out folks. And so we've got the different ways where you don't have to worry about that. We'll take care of all of that. I talked about the active or the high density deployments, the management, the alerting. I didn't highlight this, but this is key too. Some of these solutions out there to support E911, they're usually configured to one location, and that's usually the DMARC. We want to make sure that E911 is supported to the end device. So if it's an emergency call box, it's going to the gymnasium at the school or whatever it is that's designated. And we do support that at the port level, and then of course multipath. I will highlight one last thing, actually two last things, but this solution is award-winning. I'm a sales guy. I'm always going to try to make it sound like it's the best thing since sliced bread. I think it is in POTS replacement. But I do think it's worth noting that when we think about some of the not regulatory, but some of the industry things, we have won awards for the solution. A lot of these are telco-focused awards, but there's a couple that I really want to dig in on. The ELI here, we've actually just won our second ELI. That is Elevator World's Award for Best Communication for Elevator Cabinets, right? The Vision Award, this is Facilities Net. This is their award for best safety device for buildings, and this is usually subscribed by facilities managers and like these larger Class A type buildings. And so getting awards like that really do provide that credibility that this solution is prime time and is ideal for these environments. And then last on this, I'll say is we did receive a Frost & Sullivan Award for best practices when it comes to POTS replacement. So as you look at your environment and you're trying to consider what the best solution out there, I would strongly suggest taking a look at Ooma and Verteks for that solution. And with that, that was really the last slide. I hope it was informative, engaging, not boring. Hopefully you didn't fall asleep with your head on the keyboard. I doubt it. But if there's any other questions, happy to answer them.
Yeah, absolutely. We'll give everybody another couple of seconds to, if you have a question, go ahead and throw those in the questions or the chat window. I'm not sure if I answered Mark's question directly. He was like, he said more or less, looking at the ports, it does look like there's only one connection per AirDial, so that would connect to their network. So I think that's what he was asking. Is there only one connection per AirDial?
Yeah, so he's talking about from the one Ethernet right here. Yeah, so yes. It would be one Ethernet connection per AirDial. That is correct.
Yep. But then you can piggyback and place more AirDials if you need more of them, correct?
And that's what we're doing here with this WAN interface. And we connect to the next device, and then we bridge them together. And then, of course, we take these lines at individual, we'd stripe them across the units.
Yes, and that's exactly what Mark's question was. So,
Okay, good.
looks
Want
like
to
we
make
did
sure we
have
answer it.
another question come in from Chris. What support do you provide when FA is monitoring the company? Uh, I think it's supposed to be claims.
Replace the monitoring companies that you might have.
Yeah,
So like if you have an ADT or whatnot, that doesn't, they stay in play. In fact, the alerting with all of that visibility and the alerting capabilities, we kind of augment them, right? So the monitoring companies can take anywhere from 7 to 10 minutes to notify somebody locally. And so you kind of get a heads up. So we don't replace that. But however, when we think about the management of the support of the device, right, we're managing the connections from the device and the LTE perspective in our network. So we have visibility to that. And then, of course, we have a 24/7, 365 support line, again, supported in North America for those use cases as well. And it's a separate, by the way, it's a separate support line than our standard UCaaS or telephony support line. It's dedicated to AirDial because we know it's mission critical and fire life safety.
fantastic. Looks like Chris had another question. Monitor companies say they will not work with VoIP circuits.
Uh-huh.
So is that something that you're seeing out there, that a lot of them that are monitoring do not want to work with a backup for the VoIPs?
Yeah, it's education. By the way, we attend some of these industry events. We go to the NFPA conference, actually, where all the fire marshals go to, and we try to educate on what this type of solution is. We go to NAC, that's the National Association of Elevator Controls, et cetera. One is to educate, one is to keep abreast of any of the changes in compliancy. When I say education, a lot of folks aren't really familiar with these type of solutions. This is a shared communication line. It's replacing the copper line, and it's still being handed off with the RJ11s from the telephony perspective. We have white papers that we have shared with concerned parties that explain all of this, and more often than not, it has then received the approval. But keep in mind, some of these companies are also dealers. Or they have a relationship with fire alarm dealers, and the dealers will want to come in and say, you don't want this type of device, you want a cellular module, for example. And if you go cellular module, they typically are singularly honed to just that carrier. And again, you're exposed from that perspective, right? And so this, as a multi-purpose device, allows you to connect multiple type of devices, and then the power of the economics come in. But for those who are saying that, they just generally aren't familiar with the solution itself, and we're happy to jump on calls and answer any questions they may have. Once we've had those, we haven't had much pushback, but there are areas where, again, people just aren't familiar with it.
Yeah, and if that's an issue that you're having, Chris, we're welcome to have you, because you are with the school board. So that might be something that maybe John can work out with compliance issues, or if there's something in the back end that we can help you out with as well. That we are always there to assist you guys. So
It's funny too, because I keep emphasizing shared communication line, because that's kind of the key term, like some of these, what they call AHJs, authorities having jurisdiction. And so often when they'll walk in, they'll look into a room, if they're not familiar with these type of solutions, they'll see it, and if it's near the alarm, they'll be like, why isn't it painted red? Why did you not do any code revision? Well, because it's not like a cellular communicator, like a module that does plug into those panels. It is a shared communication line. It is a POTS replacement. Keep it simple from that perspective.
all right, and then we had another question asking, how does the process start? So that's definitely a great question. We'll follow up with you. We can work with you to set that process up. Make sure that we go through and have all of your POTS lines. Is there anything else they should know on your side for things that we can assist them, coming into the process?
I'd say, depending on the size of your organization, if you're in IT, you may think you don't have the POTS lines because maybe you've already moved things over. But if you have facilities brethren within your organization, talk to them, because a lot of times they still have those POTS lines. So that's one thing. That's one area you might uncover some stuff you weren't aware of that I'd think about and look at. The other thing is, I would just emphasize, go look at your bills and look and see what's going on.
All right. So had some great questions there. Hopefully that answered everybody's questions. Like I said, we do send this over to everybody that registered. I'll follow up with all of you with the recording information, and hopefully you guys had some great information. And we're here to help you if you have any other questions. This is an interesting topic that's coming up that is just kind of in the back end, and most people are not seeing this. So we came up with a solution to help all of you guys. So
Yeah.
again, I want to thank the Ooma team for coming on and joining us today, and hopefully everybody will have a great day.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.